All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone, for a Tuesday evening stream. My name is Jose Vega. I am running for Congress here in the Bronx in the 15th Congressional District, and I am joined by Dennis Speed, who in his contract says I must introduce him as somebody who has 50 years of combat experience, and I have to give him a chance to explain what that means. So, Dennis, please introduce yourself.
Well, it won't be as bad as some introductions that people have heard. It won't be as untruthful as some people have heard. In 1970, December, I first met at Columbia University the economist, later clearly statesman, Lyndon LaRouche. At that time, I was on the steering committee of the Black Student Union at another college in Pennsylvania, Swarthmore College. That Black Student Union was listed in the FBI files that were stolen, actually, the following, I guess it was the following February, March, from the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, what people know as COINTELPRO. And the entirety of that group, of which I was part, was listed in those files as a singular entity. So this was a time when those of us that fancied ourselves to be some form of political activist were also used to being listed by the FBI, even if we hadn't done anything yet to deserve the listing. During that period, many groups were very active. A lot of things existed at the time. There was an active Socialist Workers' Party, an active Communist Party, an active Black Panther Party. There was an active Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There was an active Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, because it was only 2 years after the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy Jr. So there were many kinds of political action groups out there. There was the Student Organization for Black Unity. There was the Black Cultural Nationalist movement of people like Ron Karenga and us, and things that were being run in places like Newark, New Jersey by Leroy Jones, then Imam Baraka, and he remained Imam Baraka after a period of time. So it was a very hectic moment. So that's just to say a little bit about where I came from in that exchange and that discussion with people in that period. I became active and remained active from joining organization. It was actually a philosophical association, so it sort of created organizations, and that was called the International Caucus of Labor Committees, and that was in February 16th of 1972. So I have been doing one version or another of what I got involved in doing back then, with a particular intellectual figure who was highly controversial then and now to some degree, but who passed away on February 12th of 2019. So for 6 years, Lyndon LaRouche has been personally dead, but his ideas are very much alive. So that's kind of just my own background. There are a lot of people I met, a lot of people I know, a lot of things I've done. So that's why I say 50 years and plus of combat.
Okay, well, Dennis, thank you for that introduction. Now people have some idea of who you are, and at some point, it may be interesting to delve more deep into that, because as you were talking, I realized, and given, I guess, the political climate, what was LaRouche doing at Columbia University in 1970? 2 years after the Columbia riots, right? Like that. That was just. I don't know if you want to take that up now or not. That was just a question that came up to my mind, but.
No, just to say, now LaRouche was there in the spring of '68 when all of that went down, because what happened was that he was invited there by two members of SDS at the time, Steve Comm and Tony Papert. There were people who were giving classes. And also, the difference in the environment between today and then has to be referenced, because you could appear at a campus if you had something to say, pretty much if you were anybody who had something to say. Sort of like New York City used to be at a certain time, when you did have what are called soapbox orators, people who literally would stand on, let's say, like a milk crate, as and give a speech. And the real test was, could you hold a crowd? If you could hold a crowd, people will listen. But in this particular case, LaRouche was brought onto the campus of Columbia University during the height of the unrest there, which had to do with the fact that there was a gymnasium that the university was going to try to place down in Morningside Heights Park. And this was going to impinge upon Harlem. And what had happened was a group of the students there revolted against that happening. And that was a combination of Black students, which was a different group, and the group that was around Students for a Democratic Society. There was also, of course, this was the same period in which King was assassinated. So one of the elements of what people call the Columbia riots was that there was a general outburst against the direction of the country at the time. And the fact that people thought that the government was being dishonest, I'll put it that way, minimally disingenuous, but more dishonest about the assassination both of King and then the later assassination of Robert Kennedy.
Okay. I could probably keep asking you more about that, actually, because I'm realizing now that it's not something I've actually thought about a lot since you brought it up. But the purpose of why we're here today and why I've titled it the title, and some of you may have seen my ad on X where I was talking about this live stream coming up, was to address some of the comments and criticisms, messages, and support, and also constructive criticism that I got from the podcast with Brianna Joy Gray. And as I was saying in the beginning, there were two main controversies that came up. One, actually, Dennis, was about LaRouche. And I guess we kind of addressed it a little bit in the beginning. The other one was on this idea of what American system actually means. And I invited you on to talk about the American system. And I wanted to just kind of run through some of these comments because I thought that they all followed around this general theme. So, for example, this comment here says, this person's quoting me, "I don't consider myself left or right," says Jose Vega at 28 minutes. Yes, labeling is bad, but I think it's good to take a stand. Then the next comment here, this person said, "I like Vega. I've heard him on a lot of other platforms. I know he doesn't like labels, but when he says what he stands for, he sounds like a commie, and I'm all for it." Then this person here, I will come back to this comment, but basically this person was saying that why should the Space CCC be only limited to 18 to 26 years old? It's idiocy to set an age limit. You have to have a lot of people above that age range who either didn't have a high school education opportunity or are looking for a new field or want to do a project like that. Universal programs are easier to market and get more people in your camp. Somehow Bronx men age 18 to 26 only eligible is just the other end of a Kamala Harris-esque means testing bullshit. Compare that to something like Zoran Mamdani's campaign for universal childcare, better buses, affordable housing. He keeps going like that. I'm not in the Bronx though, so good luck to him and his pet project, I suppose. First of all, I would say, yeah, the age limit idea, it was coming directly from what FDR was doing in the 30s with the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and that was the backbone of young men and a generation that we were losing at the time. These were, it's very similar to the Bronx today. A lot of them were illiterate, unskilled, and if they were allowed to continue to go on further and get older without the employment, skill, or education, they would not have probably been incentivized to get it at some point. And even then, and actually there's a nice reference to it in To Kill a Mockingbird in the beginning, but some of the families in To Kill a Mockingbird worked in some of these FDR programs. And I think the works programs are only mentioned once in that book, but it very much does kind of set a sort of tone for the 1930s, because I think it takes place in 1936, where she talks about how everybody was still destitute, but there was a feeling of hope. Anyway, that's just kind of a tangent, but I'm moving along here. This person says, and now we're going to sort of get into the criticism of the American system of economics. Somebody said, Jose seems nice, but his ideology does seem muddled. Reminds me of RFK Jr. reaching for buzzy individual policies that sound good, but don't cohere with any core principles. Somebody else then responded, I was noticing this too and couldn't put a word on it. Muddled is absolutely what is happening. I think it goes all the way back to how Trump was even temporarily supported. Nevertheless, I'm sure he will be thousands or millions of times better than Torres. And I would just say maybe I can be better with how I communicate ideas. I'm not perfect. I do agree. And then here we go. Now, this comment, Dennis, and the next one, I think I want to use as platforms to kind of kick off the discussion. So this guy, John Polo, was responding to the first two comments I read, and he starts quoting me. I'm someone who believes in the American system of economics. And then he says, what does that mean? On its face, that sounds like capitalist, since that's how most people, especially those at the top, describe the economic system in the US. Obviously, with the wrench that the orange turd, I guess is Trump, has thrown in, it's very skewed. But I guess it's more capitalist than state-run. However, then he talks about workers have rights and being able to make a living. And then he quotes me again, the US economy should be focused centered around people. Those are ideals that capitalism considers anathema. I can get down with this part, but I don't think the American system of economics is really intent on this, not to mention that capitalism is not interested in doing anything for poverty or the working poor. And then just one more, this one's a little bit of a mouthful, but I think it is definitely, well, maybe we'll just come back to that. So yeah, so Dennis, do you want to kind of go off from there? Before you go, thank you, Fine Weather, for the nice comment. I will keep the fire burning. All right, but go ahead, Dennis.
Well, maybe what we might do, which might make it, cut to the chase, so to speak. Why don't you look up the term, the American system of economics? We're going to do this. We're going to Google it, as they say. It's not a practice I like, but it'll work here.
Sure, no problem. And as I do that, I do just want to point out we are getting live comments, by the way. This person said the left-right binary holds everyone hostage. Jose Vega is right to leave it behind. We get the left and right from the French Revolution, yet politics existed infinitely before that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that comes from the seating arrangements in the French Assembly. That's what he's referring to.
Right. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share my screen as we Google. Here we go. Okay, so basically, I'm like, let's assume I'm like a high school student or something, and I'm just Googling the American system of economics. So we type this into Google. So I get, first thing here is like overview. The US is a country. That doesn't really help. Yeah. But let's see here. The first thing is Wikipedia American System Economic Plan. This article is a part of series about Henry Clay. Then the Wikipedia says, the American system was an economic plan that played an important role in American policy during the first half of the 19th century, rooted in the so-called American School ideas and of the Hamiltonian economic program of Alexander Hamilton. A plan to strengthen and unify the nation, the American system was advanced by the Whig Party and a number of leading politicians, including Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. Clay was the first to refer to it as the American system, motivated by a growing economy bolstered with major exports such as cotton, tobacco, native sod, and tar. The politicians sought to create a structure for expanding trade. The system included such policies as support for a high tariff to protect American industries and generate revenue for the federal government. I can already see what people are going to say to that. Maintenance of high public land prices to generate federal revenue, preservation of the Bank of the United States to stabilize the currency and rein in risky state and local banks, development of a system of internal improvements such as road and canals, which would knit the nation together and be financed by the tariff and land sales.
Okay, so now we know that there is something that when you go to Wikipedia or Google, you get something that says something which, whether we agree with this or we don't, we know it's there. Correct. So what's important just about that is to understand, therefore, that there's something you're referring to, which is a very specific historical phenomenon. We're not referring, for example, to capitalism as that might be understood as being the theory of economy of political economy of Adam Smith, for example. See, like Adam Smith, I would argue, was an enemy of the American system. And that his book, The Wealth of Nations, was actually in part a polemic against the American Revolution. Smith thought that the United States, or what became the United States, the American colonies were more suited to tobacco and cotton plantation economy, basically, and a rural base. He did not think that what would become the United States, the American colonies, were suited for manufacturing. Now, there was manufacturing that existed in the American colonies, particularly in Massachusetts, but also Pennsylvania. Many states had some manufacturing. And in part, what was happening during the period of the 17th century now is that there was an attempt to begin a kind of transition to independent mining and manufacturing, particularly later on, but even as early as the 1640s at the Saugus Iron Works, for example, to iron manufacturing, which was considered to be particularly dangerous in that weapons manufacturing, for example, would follow. So this was discouraged by Britain, and there was a faction in the colonies before the revolution that was seeking to transition America from a plantation economy to a manufacturing economy. Alexander Hamilton was recruited to that faction. That was a faction that was significantly organized around Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia. But Hamilton, really from his early 20s, was a proponent of this idea, particularly of the national bank and also internal improvements. So it's from Alexander Hamilton's work when he was as the first Treasury Secretary that much of the foundation of what will later be called by Henry Clay the American system comes. And so I just want, first of all, to make it clear that the American system, as it was formulated by the first Americans that talked about it, Hamilton, Matthew Carey from Pennsylvania, his son Henry Carey, was seen as an anti-British colonial system. It was opposed to the systems of economy that Britain had imposed through particularly the East India Company and some other things. So that's just to understand what we're referring to here.
So I actually have some quotes here by Henry Carey. And I wanted to read this, Dennis, and then you can kind of, this is the quote that says I'll just read it. And this is a little bit of abridged, but
by the way, Jose, do you know that every once in a while we're getting a glitch in your picture? I don't know if you know that. Like you'll beep off and come right back.
That might be you and your connection.
Oh, okay.
It might be. But
okay. Well, if somebody else should indicate. So if they're not seeing it, I'm fine with it. I understand what you're doing. So I'm good.
No problem. Yeah. If you are seeing that problem, please let me know in the chat. Okay. Two systems are before the world. The one looks to increasing the proportion of persons and of capital engaged in trade and transportation, and therefore to diminishing the proportion engaged in producing commodities with which to trade, with necessarily diminished return to the labor of all, while the other looks to increasing the proportion engaged in the work of production and diminishing that engaged in trade and transportation with increased return to all, giving the laborer good wages and to the owner of capital good profits.
Okay, let's stop right there. Hold on.
Let's stop right there.
If you really want to do this, let's make sure people understand what we're talking about here.
Sure.
Because remember, now this is being written, what year is that quote from?
This is from the Harmony of Interest.
I believe that's 1851, probably 1850s. This is.
I think you are right. Yes, yes.
Okay. So now this is 1850-51 means this is approximately the time of the Dred Scott decision in America, This is before the Republican Party exists. The Republican Party is going to get created during the mid 1850s, 1854 through 56. Abraham Lincoln will be its first presidential candidate. It will be composed by various people, including Frederick Douglass, the African-American, of course, orator and abolitionist. And so Carey is writing this at the time, this is important, I just understand, as the proponent of a faction that's going to be the economic advisors to Abraham Lincoln when he gets into the presidency in 1860. That's just to set this up so that people understand what this is. Carey was also at this time the economic editor of the New York Tribune. And as such, published various authors on economics, one of whom was Karl Marx. So just to put that in perspective.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He had an extensive correspondence with Marx, and he was the person that published Marx at that period in the United States. It's how Karl Marx became known. He was partially a correspondent on matters pertaining to Europe, but also he was a general proponent of economics, and the two of them had this dialogue. What this is referring to is, he's going to say it in a minute, the difference between what he calls the British system and what he calls the American system. And his first statement talks about this. Well, think about globalization, increasing the proportion of persons and of capital engaged in trade and transportation, and diminishing the proportion engaged in producing commodities. Think about the collapse of American production, mining and manufacturing between about roughly 1975, 1980 certainly, and now. And he's saying that, so this one is going to necessarily diminish return to the labor of all, but the other looks to increasing the proportion engaged in the work of production, mining, manufacturing, and agriculture, and diminishing that section engaged in trade and transportation, which increasing growth. Now, that would be a little bit different in the modern world because, of course, there weren't planes then, there weren't trains, there weren't other things. But what his focus here is giving the laborer good wages and the owner of capital good profits. So, just to say, go ahead.
So then he continues, one looks to compelling the farmers and planters of the Union to continue their contributions for the support of the fleets and the armies, the paupers, the nobles, and the sovereigns of Europe. The other to enabling ourselves to apply the same means to the moral and intellectual improvements of the sovereigns of America. One looks to the continuance of that bastard freedom of trade, which denies the principle of protection, yet doles it out as revenue duties. The other by extending the area of legitimate free trade by the establishment of perfect protection, followed by the annexation of individuals and communities, and ultimately by the abolition of customs houses. One looks to exporting men to occupy desert tracts, the sovereignty of which is obtained by aid of diplomacy or war. The other to increasing the value of an immense extent of vacant land by importing men by millions for their occupation.
Okay, let's stop here. Let's take just that last point. Think Gaza, think the Israel conflict, and there you go. Right? You got this immense tract of Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying you have to move the Palestinians there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the immense tracts of desert that are there. But the Egyptian government has adopted this program of greening the desert. They started 12 cities, most of them in desert. Usually these are for 2 million people, 1 to 2 million. Some of them are as large as for 5 million. But what they're doing is
are you muted, Dennis? I think I just lost your audio.
No, I didn't mute.
You know what it could be? Were you getting a phone call or something? Is that what happened? And that's what?
No, I heard a loud.
Can you refresh the page? Just refresh on your iPad. You're on your iPad, right? Just refresh and then just reconnect, and that should do it. Hopefully. Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to do it here. Hold on. Yeah.
Okay, folks, here we go. Let's see here. Oh, Robert said he could hear you. Oh man, is it me then? You know what?
How's that?
Okay, Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear
Oh,
me?
all audio is good. Oh, you know what? It probably is me. Hold on, stay right there, Dennis.
Right.
Sorry about that, Dennis.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, there we go. Now I should be able to hear you. Dennis, can you hear me?
I can hear you pretty clearly.
It was my fault for some reason. Hold on.
Oh, okay. I'm not getting your picture now, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I know why. Sorry about that. That was
Right.
I don't know what happened there, but like all my everything just reset there in the middle for some reason. That this yellow
Yeah.
box will go away.
Right.
But
Uh-huh.
so we were talking about the fact
We're
that
just looking at that quote. That's all.
the quote, the last thing you said was Egypt has greened is greening its
Greening the
deserts,
desert.
12
Yeah.
cities. That was the last thing I heard.
Right,
And
right. And what
thank you,
it's
Isaac,
working
for
on.
telling me the audio was good. That means a lot. Please let us know more.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, great, very good. So yeah, so my only point is that when Egypt makes that proposal about Gaza right now, they're not making that proposal just out of their butt. You know, they've done the building of 12 cities. They're working on another, they've got designs for another 12. And one of the things that we can begin to look at is in that kind of a situation where you're talking about construction. Let's talk about reconstruction of the Gaza. Obviously, they're destroying Gaza as we speak, but let's act as if people were going to act right. They're going to be sane. Then the way we would approach this would require more Palestinians in the area, or more people in the area, many of whom, of course, would be Palestinian. And that would happen because if people from around the world, I mean, there are approximately, I don't know precisely, but I believe about another 7.5 to 8 million Palestinians in various parts of the diaspora around the world. Many of them would probably want to go back there and be part of the workforce under the circumstances that there were a real commitment to developing and greening the desert of the area, much of which used to be green. Where you're going back into the area of approximately 800 years ago. Well, even more like at the time of the Convivencia, more like the 11th century. Much of that area, for example, like around Libya and so on, was much more verdant, much greener than it is now. That's why you have the underground rivers in Libya, because you used to have waters flowing from the Congo River, which is, of course, in Central Africa, which flowed northward. And that used to, together with others, irrigate that area of Libya. So what the Egyptians are trying to do is do something similar, using in part the Nile and other water that they have. But all I'm trying to suggest here is that when we look at the aridity of Saudi Arabia, maybe the most important thing to figure out is how to get fresh water in an area like that. It's all this gigantic peninsula with nobody living in it. And if that kind of thing became the joint project, which involved many nations of the world, a lot of the incentive around the conflict with the Palestinians, the economic incentive now would be abated. Of course, you're dealing with the religious problem. Of course, you're dealing with the fanaticism problem. Yes, we know this. But at the same time, if you pursue what he says, one system looks to exporting men to occupy desert tracts, the sovereignty of which is obtained by aid of diplomacy or war. Well, we know with that's sort of what the British Empire did with Israel, with the Israel Project. The other, to increasing the value of an immense extent of vacant land by importing men by millions for their occupation. Well, if you want to increase the value of land in the case of that area, you'd have to irrigate it. So I'm just trying to give that as an example for what we mean by the different systems.
All right, let's go on here. I think this is the last slide here. Oh no. Dang it. I had one more quote, which I will just read because I have it pulled up here on the other window. So
Okay.
I will pull, or maybe I can't. Let's see. Here we go.
I think I Okay, if you can't find it, I think I know where this is because while you were down, I looked it up.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you've got it pulled up, I mean, I don't want to go for it.
Yeah, one system looks to pauperism, ignorance,
Yeah.
depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks toward universal war, the other toward universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system, for it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. Such is the true mission of the people of the United States. So this is a different economic idea.
Absolutely. And that is something that I think a lot of people might be kind of surprised to learn about or hear about. That I think back to when I was in high school and I was learning American history. You don't actually learn about the economy that built the country other than slavery as a form of
Mhm.
economic growth or as a form of economic production, right? And also our tobacco exports and our cotton exports, which, as you know, anybody would learn, is mostly fueled by the manual labor that
Mhm.
the slaves were doing, right?
Mhm.
And so that this is why then slavery was such a popular thing in the South, because this is the main economic engine that keeps these southern states afloat, is the fact that they can export all these goods and stuff. And therefore, you know, then this how people make the argument that the United States therefore was always a capitalist system and always looked for exploitation as a way to make a profit and make its way to you know, prosper basically and
Mhm.
develop.
Mhm.
So
Right.
I don't know if you have any comments to that first, because there is something specific I wanted to bring up, which is like the Erie Canal. This is a picture of the Erie Canal today.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know the history of this project, let alone, you know, why it was so important for early America. You know, Gouverneur Morris, who, you know, if you followed our campaign at all, you have to know that Gouverneur Morris is, you know, he's buried here in the Bronx, penman of the Constitution. He also was on the chair, or he was the chair of the committee to actually get this thing built. Um, and it was very important, not just for New York State. I mean, yes, you know, the fact that you have boats now that could go up and down the Erie Canal that were exporting things like coal and resources and stuff, but just the very fact of getting it built was also a big fight in New York. And Dennis, I'm hoping you can kind of tell us a little bit more about the fight around the Erie Canal and why it was so crucial for development in early America. And where I'm going with it is it's like an example of an economy engine that was not reliant on slavery.
What you had was you had a revolutionary faction. You have to think about a person like Ben Franklin and his inventions, whether we're talking about the Franklin stove or bifocals, his work, of course, in electricity, or the other kinds of things that he just did in the way of social inventions, like the fire department or the library, or his founding of the University of Pennsylvania. Of course, he was a printer by trade. So that was one crew, which is very different than, let's say, the background of a person like a Thomas Jefferson, who, while he may be, in one sense, certainly an ingenious person, is ensconced in a plantation economy. Washington is kind of a mixture because he's a surveyor, which is a highly skilled enterprise. As anybody who looks at the work of people like the mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss, and others, and understands what it means to actually be able to survey a tract of land, which of course is uneven, and be able to make accurate estimates and know how to deploy resources, man-made resources, to improve the land. And of course there was also Washington's military service. So he was very sort of a different type. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when the revolution happens, all of these types of people are gathered together in a political enterprise, which has a military component but that military component lasts for 7 years, from 76 to 83. And then what happens is they have a confederacy. That's what it's a confederate, the Articles of Confederation. That's what they're living under. They live under those articles for 4 years. But it's noticed that this is a problem because it said in that earlier quote from Henry Carey, it talked about customs houses. And what that refers to is the fact that you have tolls that had to be paid in between, for example, colonies. So when you had Pennsylvania and you had Maryland and you had Virginia, there were various kinds of toll relationships. This was still largely true in the aftermath of the Revolution. And what happened was it was seen that the Confederacy didn't work. And so there was an organizing of another convention, which Hamilton, Franklin, and Washington largely spearheaded. There were other people that were involved. Gouverneur Morris, who you mentioned from New York, was the closest friend of Alexander Hamilton. So he was very involved in a lot of these discussions. And what they were looking to do at that point, having won the military conflict, they were going to expand westward. But westward means, for example, areas like Ohio. Some people may have heard of the university called Case Western Reserve. It's got that name because the Western Reserve was actually part of Connecticut, but it was the Western Reserve of Connecticut, and it went out to Ohio. Some people have heard about something called the Northwest Ordinance, which was something that is a sort of series of directives for how to basically populate the northwestern sections of what were the immediate areas of Ohio and west of there. There was the Virginia Company, which is something that Washington headed up. And that was about figuring out ways to extend the Potomac River and northward and northwestward. There was the Jersey Company. The Jersey Company was started by Alexander Hamilton. That's where the city, Jersey City, comes from. It's a corporation that Hamilton starts. There's a project called the Society for Useful Manufacturers. That's Paterson, New Jersey. That city was started around the Paterson Falls, which were the site of energy production through water hydroelectric power. And Washington and Hamilton put that together.
I was just there, by the way. And anybody who does go to Paterson, New Jersey, as somebody told me as we were going in there, it's the Detroit of New Jersey, and we weren't there yet. And I thought, all right, you're exaggerating, because how fucked up can Detroit is fucked up. But then you go to Paterson, New Jersey, and you just see like factory after factory after a factory that's just been abandoned or remodeled into a museum. It's just barren and destitute, and in the middle of it is Paterson Falls. You do see the waterfalls there, and then you do see the hydroelectric plant there that is being preserved by the federal government, because it's a historic site. And if it wasn't for it being a historic site, that probably would have been shut down too.
Yeah, well, see, what you're talking about when you talk about those factories, you're talking about my world. You're talking about the time when we became political. All those people were working. Those things are all open. And a lot of them, of course, have also been just completely destroyed, like Curtis Wright, for example. I mean, New Jersey, for example, was completely industrialized. There was a lot of stuff. Of course, there was Exxon, the oil companies, but then there were a lot of auto, like Ford Edison, Linden GM. We can go on and start naming all these places. The city of Newark was called the city of invention. The city of Newark was an entire manufacturing center in the 1780s, 90s, 1800s, 1810, 1812, and that area along the river there, and also the Passaic River and so on. That was all industry. This was created by Hamilton and by the first Washington administration, and second, which Hamilton was the first Treasury Secretary. So that's what the American system is. And that's what the Constitution is created to empower. So what they were trying to do, they were building an economic system that was opposed to colonialism. It was going to be a federal system, first of the type that existed. And the concept was they would finance what they call internal improvements. That meant roads, bridges, highways, tunnels, dams, and it could also mean hospitals or schools and things like that. They didn't really have that so much in mind, but later on, that's what FDR did. So
that's no, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's where I was going to go next. The Tennessee Valley Authority. So I gave a 19th century example, Erie Canal, and then you have a 20th century example with the TVA. And just for people who may or may not know, the United States at the time was going through what was called the Great Depression. I mean, it was a very messed up time. People were living in what were called shanty towns, and some people even called them like Hoovervilles, because they blamed, President Hoover for the economic conditions. It was a very bad time in the United States. And when FDR came in, his first 100 days were just executive orders after executive orders to revitalize the United States. And one of those was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which to this day, I believe, still has something like 41% of power in that region, which I think stretches from like North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, like 41% to Kentucky. 41% of power is generated from nuclear plants that were built in those 20 years. And I think, and I found a quote here, the TVA, established at the through of the U.S. economic collapse in May 1933, built a series of 20 dams in less than 20 years to control flooding and expand navigation on the Tennessee River and its tributaries. The program introduced electricity to virtually every farm and household in an area spanning 7 states, developed improved fertilizers and advanced agricultural methods, and introduced healthcare and literacy to a population not very different at that time from many third world nations. And also, by the way, a fun fact, when FDR ran for governor, he ran on the platform of bringing electricity to upstate New York. And a lot of people in the state legislature thought that was crazy, because there were only a handful of farmers up there. So why would you spend so much money on bringing electricity upstate, not realizing that there's so much you can do with refrigeration and with advancements in agriculture at the time that needed electricity to develop. And, so you kind of see how FDR applies this principle of development to a grander national scale. And this person says their dad participated in the CCC program. Thank you, Kathy, for that. But anyway, Dennis, go ahead.
Well, it's an example of Roosevelt giving hope, because he becomes president on March 4th of 33, and he's already establishing the TVA in May of 33. So you have to think about that, right? I mean, it's 2 months. Now, right. It's important to people, so he does it. And by the way, I think that's the best way to understand both the present administration and the present time. So, we ought to already have had announcements from the Trump administration, as from any actually, of putting people to work in mining and manufacturing and these kinds of things. There's not a commitment yet to go that road in America, but there should be. Because if you look at the roads, you would know that you would need to go that road. If you're concerned about various questions of pollution, you should go that road. Because if you have advanced high-speed rail, meaning magnetically levitated trains, and also high-speed trains, which can go 150 to 200 miles an hour, that's relatively higher speed than we're at. And then vacuum trains, like a 3-tiered system. The system of trains that are going between 150 and 200 miles an hour, plus then the system of trains going between 250 and 400 approximately miles an hour, and then the system of trains that go at 1,200 miles an hour, which are your vacuum trains, which then means that the traffic that you have in airports, much of which is Boston to New York or New York to Washington, short hops, you basically would make that obsolete. And therefore, you're going to save on the fuel and various other things. But there's another thing you're doing, which is that you are creating more efficient corridors, like all that time that you have with the congestion where cars have to go to the airport. They have to line up. They have to bunch, get the parking space, all that kind of stuff. you can do away with. It will make shipping of goods much more effective, much more efficient, and would allow you to also develop sort of tributary cities along those transport corridors. You can in fact create development corridors. You could have semi-finished goods being shipped and being reshipped or finished along those rail transport corridors. So it's not just for passengers, it's also for freight. And you would then, as I say, be able to also develop cities as tributaries off that with smaller rail, or rather slower rail. You can do things besides trains. You can do other kinds of things, obviously. I'm not saying you don't have automobiles at all or anything, but you can see the difference. All that trucking traffic we have on the highways that tear them up. You wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah. This person here says, I live in Chattanooga, and it would be a malarial plain without TVA. People have forgotten that the government can do good things. I agree with you. And so now I just kind of want to, we're coming up on time here a little bit, and I do hope that people did get something out of this. I want to end on, well, first of all, there's two things I want to end on. One is that the people who then played a key leadership in the TVA had actually presented a plan to the United Nations about the Middle East, talking about how Israel and the Arab states, the adjacent Arab states, should work together, because that will be essential to the execution of the proposed overall plan. And they continue, only small portions could be developed to an individual country's advantage without such cooperation. And of course, we're talking about water management, desalination, right? Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Dennis?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm very interested in the comments. I'm very happy about the comments, and I mean that, because see, now we're clarifying what it is, Jose, you're trying to do, and some of us were trying to do back in the day, 50 years ago, because a lot of these things we're talking about, we were talking about then. Back then, we were trying to replace the World Bank, because the World Bank, which Robert McNamara was running, and he had been running the Vietnam War. So our thing was, wait a minute, this has got to be a plan for genocide. So we proposed something called an International Development Bank, and had a plan for the Southwest Asia, we called it, but Middle East, like this Oasis plan that, in approximation anyway, the Egyptians had. But I like the fact that people are picking up, they're saying things. If that's what people mean by the engagement of government and the use of government for the purpose of good, not only am I for that, I'm telling you that is what the American system is supposed to be. Now, I grant you, you want to say to me, yeah, but it's nothing like that. Hey, I'm all with you on that. That's true. That's true. But what we need to do is to have a movement, which and I think we can do it, which is discussing these kind of matters. Well, how are we going to get this kind of thing to happen? And if we think, I mean, it has to have a political expression. We all know that. So whether it's a Congress or whatever it may be, but it's also true that just this kind of discussion. So on this idea about the plan that they were talking about, you mentioned the TVA. Well, when Eisenhower became the president, after he had that fight with the British and the French with Suez in 1956, he was already thinking about this, and he proposed some water desalination plans. This was actually a little bit later. It was back in 67, right at the close of the war. But he had the idea earlier. Now, he was talking about the Atoms for Peace plan at that time, the notion of using nuclear power for electrification and for water desalination. Because, of course, the reason he was talking about it was he had to consider the shock of that dropping those bombs, which did not have to be dropped. There was no military reason for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is not true. It's said, but it wasn't true. And so Eisenhower did not approve the use of those bombs. He thought that they did not have to be used. So his thing was, hey, we got to do something quick, because otherwise we're going to be starting to nuke everybody. So he came up with this concept of Atoms for Peace, which was a way of his trying to take the the before this is now before we get an arms race going. It hadn't happened. Well, it was beginning to happen. It was beginning to happen, but it wasn't yet really out of the gate in the way in which we know it today. So I'll just reference that. And yes, I think that it may be useful for people to look back at those plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this guy here, by the way, just in reference, Fog of War, McNamara's autobiographical video is one of the best self-reports of all time. Thank you, Isaac, for that comment. Yeah, honestly, I think we could just end it there. I mean, it's up to you, Dennis. I was also going to just kind of end by just briefly addressing some of the anti-LaRouche stuff where they were calling him CIA and stuff, but I don't know if we want to go on that or maybe on the next time we do it.
Let's do it the next time, but I'll tell you one thing I would like ask people to do. This is for real, okay? I want to put a committee together that gets Freedom of Information Act files on Lyndon LaRouche. And I don't care what those files say. I'd like to know what is the story. I know what I think the story is, but I don't know. Now, I hear that we were talking about 80,000 pages of the Kennedy files coming out and some other things being said. So I would just like to say that about that. I think that the other thing is that I think some people I know, particularly my wife, who was on trial with Lyndon LaRouche, would be happy to answer any questions about Lyndon LaRouche. But there's another thing, just to say on all of this. You heard, we just started talking about the American system. My thing is, whoever you like or don't like, what are they saying what are their policies? What are they talking about doing? Then, okay, if the policy works, go with that, even if you don't know what you think of the person. But on that thing with just that's the only thing I'd like to say about it. I think, LaRouche wrote a whole lot of stuff on economics in particular. He wrote on a lot of topics, but that's what we're here. I mean, the American system. And, we're at the 250th birthday of the country. And I'm saying Alexander Hamilton and Franklin and Gouverneur Morris, these guys are different than talking about Jefferson, Patrick Henry, even Madison, although I give Madison kind of a pass on some stuff. But there's a lot of people that founded the country. There are flaws and problems with those people. But we're here and we're able to talk about those flaws because of what they did. Now, that doesn't mean we should commit to their flaws, nor does it mean we should ignore them, nor does it mean we shouldn't call those out. But we should realize that we are likely to repeat at best what they did ourselves, and to not be surprised about the fact that there are going to be things we're going to do that are going to be called out about us. So I just think it's important to have that sense of perspective. I think that's also true on anybody. You can talk about any individual you want, whether that's Lyndon LaRouche, whether that's RFK, JFK, MLK, Malcolm X, name anybody you want. You're going to find something wrong with them. But the important thing is, what do you find from their ideas that you can be responsible for and carry on? So, that's just my thing on that.
No, perfect. And I think the next stream I do probably will be kind of going more into the LaRouche case with Lynn Speed. I think that'd be interesting. I'll probably have a set of questions for her, and I'll probably ask her where they keep the Klan hood, since people keep alleging you guys work with the Ku Klux Klan. So and that won't be funny until you actually see what Lynn Speed looks like, and then but
yeah, anyway, but there's a lot of things. Okay, there's a lot of things that happen in 50 years. So
that's also true. Yeah. So
okay, I have a big mouth about them. I don't have a problem talking about them. Okay.
Sure.
Neither does she.
So I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. I would say maybe about 80 to 100 people kind of came in, are currently watching right now across all platforms. I want to thank all of you for coming in. Thank you for your questions. If you haven't donated and supported the campaign, vote vega.nyc. Vote vega.nyc to get connected with the campaign. Support us so we can continue to bring you these kinds of live streams. And please don't be afraid to continue to comment. I would like for these streams to be interactive, to be able to talk with you and also get you involved as well. So with that, I will see you all next time.